Well, good morning and welcome to Survival Skills. And you're watching Kevin Williams and the Elevenses live webcast. It's yet another day of lockdown, Wednesday the 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. It's difficult to keep track, isn't it? So thank you for joining me this morning. I've got a packed show. The topics we'll be looking at this morning include the controversial document published by Oxfordshire County Council, and we'll be looking at the MAG response to that. We'll take a look at I've just done with my software here. I've just made a muddle of it. We'll be looking at the Bilstein shock absorbers. They have been high-end manufacturer for cars. They're coming back into biking. Take a quick look at that. I've got some news stories for you coming up, and we'll round off the show by talking about the technique of counterweighting. So that'll be right at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. Don't miss it. And just before I carry on with that, one thing I will say is if you missed Monday's show, do pop over to my YouTube channel or catch up here and have a look to see the interview I did with Paul Vansbury on CE clothing, and specifically on their abrasion resistant garments. It's a bit of an eye-opener. He described the CEA standard as a rubber stamp that basically allows manufacturers to produce what they already produce and make it a CE approved garment. Now, whether you think that's a good thing or not, I will leave for you to decide, but it's definitely worth having a look. Okay, so in today's news, Covec, the manufacturer of the bullet abrasion resistant motorcycle clothing, I've got one of their jackets actually, is being recognised with a Queen's Award for Industry for, it says here, outstanding continuous growth in overseas sales. That, the company says, places Covec in a prime position to become a world leader in high performance textiles, including licensing to and producing for a variety of reputed global brands. They're based in Southampton, and they've seen their overseas sales grow by nearly 600% over a 6-year period. And exports now make up over half of their total sales, which is pretty impressive, really. Another British sales success is Rock Oil. They've also been recognised in the Queen's Awards for Enterprise, again for outstanding achievement in international trade. Now, you'll probably recognise them as a motorcyclist for their range of oils, but their lubricant business covers a whole series of bases, including obviously automotive, but also agricultural, commercial, industrial and marine lubricants. If you're still planning to cleaning the bike but haven't yet got around to it, then you might want to consider an offer on the M&P site because they've got a deal on Muck Off bike cleaner. Now, I've used this in the past and I've been reasonably happy with it. Sales blurb says it's the most effective cleaner out there, but don't they all? But as long as you get rid of the sort of sticky chain gloop first with something else, then I've found that the Muck Off is actually pretty good. What they say is it doesn't need any dangerous, nasty acids or chemicals. And then they continue, in fact, our cleaner is biodegradable, free from acids, CFCs and solvents, and it's alkaline based. So you can clean away with a guilt-free conscience. Well, one thing I would say, coming from chemistry background a long time ago, is that alkalis can be quite as nasty as acid, as I know very well from burning my hand in the lab by resting it in a puddle of what turned out to be concentrated sodium hydroxide. So despite the claim that it's safe on all surfaces, I would still make sure that it's flushed away with plenty of water and before you park the bike up. Anyway, they're offering basically the offer is 2 5-litre containers of the pink stuff for £25 rather than the more normal £60. And if you really want to go to town with cleaning, you can get 4 times 5 litres for 45 quid. That will last you a long time unless you are into cleaning your bike every single day of the week. All plus postage and packing, of course. Not sure you'll get it in time for Friday's item, where I'll be carrying on covering bike cleaning. Okay, just a reminder that you're watching Survival Skills live here with the Elevenses show. And still to come, we've got oil prices and why they've gone negative. We've got MAG and their response to the County Council document in Oxfordshire. And we'll be looking finally at biking tips on how to turn the bike tighter for almost no effort. Okay, so second story, what's been going on with the price of oil? Well, it's an interesting one, actually, because if you've been following the news, you may have heard that it's actually gone negative. That's right. Basically, they are paying people to take the oil away. It's the first time it's happened in the price of oil's history, apparently, and the barrel of the US benchmark oil, which is West Texas Intermediate, for those who are interested, it fell as low as minus $37 a barrel, which is fairly phenomenal when you think about it. I've actually got a graph here, if I manage to get it up on screen, which I can show you. Here we go. Let's get the right one up. There it is. Okay. Have a look at that, and you can see what's happened to the price of oil over the last few months. It stabilized a little when there was a price glut. Start again. There was a price war which caused a glut of oil, so the price sort of dropped and then stabilized. But what's happened is the bottom has fallen out of that market at the moment. So that's from Bloomberg over in the US, and it was reproduced on the BBC yesterday. So like many other commodities which are traded as futures, what's happened is that many of the traders were left with options to buy oil on Tuesday, and they've been attempting to offload those options because they don't want to actually have to take delivery of that oil. They've got nowhere to sell it on. So the problem is that the US in particular is probably affecting other countries as well, but it's certainly the issue has been publicized from the USA. They're running out of places to store all the oil that's been coming out of the ground. With the demand almost dried up, oil companies have been renting tankers just to park with a full load. And what that's done in turn is driven up the price of renting those vessels. Stuart Glickman, who's an energy equity analyst at CFRA Research, described the situation as off the charts wacky. He says the massive demand shock was so massive, it's overwhelmed anything that people could have expected. As I say, the irony really is it's just a few weeks ago, the major oil companies were engaged in a price war and producing ever increasing quantities of oil, which was driving prices down anyway. Then they cut a deal to restrict their output to attempt to put the price back up again, and everything's been overtaken by events. So here's a question for you. If the wholesale oil costs have dramatically fallen as the global demand has shrunk during the crisis, that must have had a knock-on effect at the pumps, right? Well, actually, the answer to that is not really. Fuel prices had declined a little just before the lockdown, and that was due to the glut from the overproduction that I was talking about due to the price war. But since then, the price drop has pretty much stalled. The AA and the RAC have both looked into this, and what they've found is that although some independents have been selling fuel for just about a pound a litre, that price drop has not been widespread. And at the weekend, the AA fuel spokesman, a chap called Luke Baudet, warns that prices are stuck at around about 110 per litre. He said that the wholesale costs had not been filtered down to motorists. So, okay, with the wholesale costs down to around 16p a litre, the sums actually work out like this. Add to that 16p, which is the base price of the processed fuel, you've got to add 58p in fuel duty, and then around about 9p retailer and supplier margin, and then you add 20% VAT on top of all that, and what you should get is around about £1. And I've obviously not been able to head out on the road and check prices at the pumps, but Mr. Baudet claimed that something's not right with the price of petrol at the moment, and the RAC fuel spokesman, chap called Simon Williams, said it was unlikely that we'd see any further reductions because the oil companies have struck that deal to limit supplies. But obviously, with the shutdown, that's all in a bit of abeyance. There's always a delay passing any saving on, because there's processed fuel in the pipeline, as it were, and that was obviously bought at that higher cost. But it does appear that some of that drop hasn't come down the chain to the users. And as usual, it's the end user who pays to keep corporate profits up. Okay, so finish on that controversial note there. Don't forget you're watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. Don't forget my paperback books are still available. In fact, if you head over to my YouTube, start again, if you head over to my Facebook page, you'll find that there's actually a 15% special offer from my publishers on at the moment. I can't remember when it expires, but if you go over and enter the discount code, you'll get 15% off your price. So, okay, still to come, we'll be looking at better biking skills and turning the bike tighter. But just before we do that, let's move on to a quickie about Bilstein. Now, Bilstein are a suspension specialist. They supply a lot of the high-end cars. Mercedes springs to mind, and they're set to re-enter the motorcycle suspension market. Now, Bilstein are around 100 years old, but it's not since the late 70s, early 80s that they've actually been engaged with the motorcycle market. They're a German company, and their focus has been entirely on four wheels since then. Now, they're about to start producing shocks for two wheels again, and they'll be starting with the BMW S1000RR sports bike. They have a reputation for producing very high quality kit, and particularly kit that works with electronic suspension adjustment. And the shocks and the forks for the BMW S1000RR are reputed to have been in development for between 4 and 5 years, so they should have had plenty of time to iron out any issues with them. And although no launch date's yet been announced, it's likely to be somewhere later in the year. There are also suggestions floating around that BMW may be switching to Bilsteins as original equipment. Now, again, that probably isn't going to be for the budget end of the market, but once again, with the premium reputation that Bilstein have, it would be a good fit to go with their more exotic ranges of bikes. What will it cost, mister? Well, it's unlikely, as I say, that Bilstein will be aiming their replacement shocks at the lower end of the market. It's almost certainly going to be competing at the top end with the likes of Öhlins and White Power. So don't expect them to see them down your discount store anytime soon. Okay, so don't forget to, you can join me here with Elevenses every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday at 11 BST. If you missed the show, you can always head on over to Survival Skills UK, my YouTube channel. Don't forget that all-important UK. And you can catch up here on Facebook too. Now, let's move on to today's riding skill tip. Been trying to bring you one of these every week or so. How do we get a bike to turn tighter without putting too much effort into it? Well, I shall answer the question for you. Now, a lot of them don't arrive quite as often as they used to. I still get sort of Dear Doctor letters from riders who hit a problem and can't find an answer to it. And in this case, I got a email from a chap, we'll call him John for convenience sake, who was struggling to make a right turn. Now, he was having this problem particularly on roundabouts, and it particularly on one specific roundabout. So I offered to help him, and there was a bit of to and fro in question and answer, and I started to pick up some information about his riding. Now, he was a reasonably new rider, but not totally inexperienced, and one of the areas that he felt he was comfortable with was counter steering, and when I asked him a few questions on the topic, he came up with the right answers, so I guessed he probably knew what he was doing. Something else that crossed my mind was target fixation. What people tend to do is look at the outside of a right turn, which isn't the right place to look. Obviously, we need to look to the inside of the right turn, which is where we're going. So we want to look where we're going and not where we don't want to go. But that's what target fixation is. It drags our vision away from our planned path and takes us towards where we don't intend to head. So having struck that off the list too, he said that he was okay steering around the first bit of the roundabout. That's where we would tip into the roundabout and turn left initially. But then it was the subsequent right-hand maneuver that was causing him all the problems. So next theory of mine was that maybe it was too much speed. Now, this often happens. Riders either brake too late and brake into the roundabout, so they're still trying to scrub off speed as they turn in. And the initial left turn is usually a fairly mild one. It's the sharper right turn as we go around the back of the island which causes the problem. So too much speed it can create this problem too. Could be braking too late, could be just trying to ride too fast around the island, but he didn't seem to think that was it either. And then he dropped a vital clue which enabled me to figure out what the problem was. He said, quote, "I do lean my upper body into the turn to get weight on the inside, and I weight the outside peg, which makes the bike feel more stable." Right, okay. You may well have heard that piece of advice for yourself. It originates from Keith Code's Superbike School, as far as I'm aware. It's one of the things that Code talks about quite a lot in his writing is all about cross bracing from the inside handlebar, which is, if you're turning right, will be in your right hand, and the outside peg, which will be the one on your left foot is on if you're turning right. Now, the thing is, that may actually be appropriate on the track. It may be a good track technique. I've used it myself on the track. It allows you to sort of, what Code says, power up steering. But it's not appropriate for slow turns on the road, particularly slow, tight turns around the back of roundabouts. And even more so when we're actually trying to switch from a lean to the left to get around the first bit of the entry to the island, and then a lean to the right to get round the back of the roundabout itself. Not only does it take time to get our body from one side of the bike to the other, but there's another factor. If we lean our upper body into the turn, we end up pushing the motorcycle upright. And an upright motorcycle, where does that want to go? Well, the answer is straight ahead. So by leaning into a corner and making the machine respond by standing up, we're making it more difficult for that bike to steer around the bend. Now, what makes the bike turn the corner? Well, it's actually the lean angle of the tyres relative to the road surface, which determines the radius of the turn, assuming that you're at any particular speed. Now, people will often talk about something called the combined centre of mass, which is the weight of the rider and the bike combined. And they'll say that if you hang off to the inside of a corner, you actually move the centre of mass, the combined centre of mass, further in and down, and that helps cornering. Well, again, it might do on a track. It might give you a little bit of extra grip at exceedingly steep lean angles, but on the road, on a roundabout, where we're not looking for every fraction of traction from the road or the tyres, it really isn't an issue. But what we do, as I say, is if we lean into the corner, we push the bike up and that reduction in lean angle makes the bike want to turn on a wider line. So we have to compensate for that, and basically it becomes harder work to actually physically turn the handlebars to match the angle of the corner. So this body in, weight the outside peg stuff is Keith Code's Superbike School track advice, and it's really not relevant to riding around roundabouts. So what does work? Well, actually we want to be doing exactly the opposite. We want to be able to lean the motorcycle into the turn to get those those tires attacking the tarmac at a steep angle. And the easiest way to do that is to lean our body mass in the opposite direction. So instead of leaning into the turn like we would do at speed, we actually lean out of the turn. Now, I've got another photo here, which I'm just going to share with you. It's here. He says looking for it. That should be the one. It's a pretty poor photo, I'm afraid, because it was my very first digital camera, but even so, you should be able to see what's happening there. You should be able to see that the rider's body is bolt upright and the bike itself is actually leaned into the turn. Let me just make that a little bit, it doesn't make any difference. Okay, so what we're trying to do here with this technique is exactly the opposite from what Keith Code has been recommending. Lean out of the turn, push the bike down under you, and you will get the bike turning tighter. Okay, it's basic Newtonian physics. If the mass of the body goes one way, the mass of the bike must go the other way to maintain balance. And that technique is called counterweighting. Now, it's something that all direct access instructors, to my knowledge, pretty much all of them anyway, teach riders to deal with tight turns, to do the U-turn and the slow maneuvering skills generally. But for some reason, it doesn't get passed on. Once people completed their training, got their test, it's one of those skills that people tend to forget. Another thing I've heard is that you can't counterweight on a sports bike. Well, you can. It's just a bit more tricky. I've done a CBT riding a GSXR 750, which is hardly the most convenient bike to use, but I did have to use it once or twice. And yeah, I can demonstrate foot up, full lock U-turns on that machine. But the only way I can do it and still turn tight on a bike with a fairly restricted steering lock is to use this counterweighting technique. The other things that you'll hear is that you can't counterweight on a bike with high handlebars. Well, again, you can. You just have to lean your body. It doesn't matter where the bars are. You just need to keep elbows and shoulders loose and lean your body and hold on to the bars and just let everything flex. It still works. What else have I heard that doesn't work? Well, another thing I've heard say is it reduces ground clearance. Well, yeah, okay, if you're counterweighting around the Ramsey hairpin on the Isle of Man TT, you probably will run out of ground clearance, but we're not talking about corners that tight on the road. We simply don't need to lean the motorcycle over that far. If you're doing moto gymkhana skills on a cruiser, with limited ground clearance, yes, you may well run out of ground clearance on those bikes. But, if it's a standard road bike and particularly a sports bike, you've got plenty of ground clearance before anything touches down. So you can certainly counterweight on these motorcycles. What's the other fallacy that often gets repeated? Well, it's that somehow by keeping the bike upright, we increase the tyre grip because we're on what people talk about as the fatter part of the tire. Well, actually, that's not how tires work anymore. They are actually designed to have a fairly consistent footprint from upright to full lean. If they suddenly had a lesser footprint as you leaned over, what do you think would happen to tire grip? What do you think would happen to your bike? You'd basically run out of grip as soon as you started to lean over. So that's simply not correct. And in fact, over the last 5 or 6 years or so, several tyre manufacturers have changed their tyre design to actually increase the footprint at full lean. So In fact, rolling the bike upright on those tires would actually put you onto a slightly narrower contact patch. So you can forget that argument too. It simply isn't correct. It doesn't make sense at all. And then there are other people who still don't believe it works. Well, there's an answer to that as well. And this is something you can actually still try, even in lockdown. You can easily test it. And you don't have to go riding. You just need a bike with the engine switched off and enough space to push it round in a circle. That's all you need. If you stand alongside the machine on the left, make a note of where you are. Turn the bars full lock and then push the bike round till it's facing the other way. So 180 degrees, half a circle, basically. Now, this is the tricky bit where you have to think about what you're doing. You have to lean the bike over and you need to take the weight on your hip here. I wouldn't try this at home with a Pan-European, but it's easy enough to demonstrate with a lighter bike like a 600, and it's very, very simple and straightforward with a 125, I can tell you, because I've done it many, many times on bike training courses. I regularly do this with my 600. So just lean the bike into your hip so the bike is actually leaning over. Remember that the bars are still on full lock, and walk the bike round 180 degrees so that you're completing the circle. Or not, because what you'll actually find is that you'll end up at a position somewhat inside where you started. By leaning the bike over, you have knocked off around about half a metre off your turning circle. So you can do that riding the bike too, for no effort at all, virtually no effort, just leaning your body, changing your body position. You will shrink your turning circle by about a half a metre to a metre quite easily. Okay, so, all right, that's counterweighting. Anything else I need to say about that? Well, basically, that's the explanation I ran through for my virtual trainee. And I got a response back 24 hours later, which was a rather nice one. He said, to quote, "I analysed my riding on the way to and from work today, and I realised that subconsciously I had been counterweighting when negotiating left-hand bends. But for some reason, I was not doing this on right-handers. I concentrated on doing this on right-handers today, and it works. You, sir, are a genius. I felt much more comfortable and in control, and as a result, I enjoyed my ride a lot more. I'll endeavour to apply this at all times in the future until it becomes second nature. Thank you again." So there we are, another happy customer, and all for free. Just in case you're wondering about my own background, I'm not only a former CBT and direct access instructor, I hold a BTEC in post-test training too, but I'm also a qualified distance learning coach with an NVQ. So if you've got a riding problem, do drop me a line. I'm always open to offer advice to anybody who asks for it. And I'm happy to talk about all aspects of riding, from everybody from novice to an experienced rider. So, okay, astonishingly, we are almost at the end of the show. So what did I want to remind you of? Don't forget the Paul Varnsbury interview that we aired on Monday. It was a bit of a long one, but if you can find yourself 45 or 50 minutes, pop over to YouTube or catch it here, and you'll find out a lot more about PPE than you probably knew. Paul is a world-renowned expert on the topic and has been on the standards committee that set the original CE standards and also the newer ones which came out in 2018. And a heads up, on Monday, I'm very much hoping to have an interview with Dr. Chris Hurren, the Australian materials scientist who has been working over in Australia to put together the MotoCap independent testing regime. And I'll be talking to him about how the test machinery actually works, what the results are that he has found via his secret shopper expeditions to buy and then destruction test motorcycle clothing all over the Southern Hemisphere. And so, yes, watch out for that one. I'm planning on recording the interview in the next day or two and then rerunning that on Monday on the next round of information about the CE standards. So, okay, don't forget, be back on Friday. More news, views, and tips for you. In the meantime, don't forget to check out the regular Facebook page posts. Fresh one went up yesterday, which has proven a little controversial. And for now, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we'll catch you again next time out on Friday. Bye for now.